The NJSpotlight Roundtable series presents The Promise of Offshore Wind. This program was recorded February 17th, 2011 in Trenton, New Jersey. This program is sponsored by Atlantic Wind Connection, Garden State Offshore Energy, and GE Energy. In this episode, members of the panel answer questions from the audience. The questioning is moderated by Tom Johnson, Energy Editor of NJSpotlight.
We usually during these conferences, open up questions from the audience. Anybody want to? This question for you, Tim, is the EDA Loan Grant for new startups only, or does it apply to retooling for the wind industry by existing New Jersey companies?
Oh, it can be existing New Jersey companies, absolutely. I mean, I think we have, the only message that I would like to leave this group is that we have a whole tool chest of programs to help create jobs and finance businesses. I could spend the entire panel talking about the nuances of each one. I don't want to do that, and I don't think you want me to do that. But it's safe to say, if you want to get into this industry and you've got some financing and you want to talk about how the state can be helpful, Michelle, me, Ken, we can all get you going in that conversation. And I think, having been in the economic development world for many years, we have the most aggressive economic development programs in the country. I mean, you talk to practitioners all over the world; they're very envious of our tools. So we're confident that we can help make those companies make those decisions easier.
Okay, here's another question from the audience. Because of energy deregulation, New Jersey power plants can now sell their power in New York and elsewhere a higher rate market. What will ensure energy generated by these turbines stays in state if it is subsidized by New Jersey taxpayers? And that leads to another question is, I mean, energy is wheeled around, especially if you build the Atlantic Wind Connection project is built. Won't New Jersey ratepayers end up subsidizing turbines from other states?
No, absolutely not. It's a standard practice within PJM, the grid system operator, to be able to dedicate the power from an offshore, well, not the practice obviously because there isn't any offshore wind, but they can do this, where they dedicate the power that is generated on an offshore wind turbine to a particular node within New Jersey, even though power would be on the wind power would be on the backbone and could move around. So it's a software issue. It's resolvable. There's a standard practice for it.
There's no interstate commerce issues with that?
Well, that is a very complex issue, which I am not an expert on and don't want to even attempt to try to touch. But I'm talking about it from the operation point of view, that the technology that we'll be using, you'll be able to clearly identify what power is being produced by a wind farm, and that power is committed to a particular node within New Jersey.
Under the Offshore Wind Economic Development Act, in order to get an OREC, you have to be a qualified offshore wind project. And what that means is you need to connect to the electric transmission system in the state. Does that make it impossible for the energy to leave the state? No, it does not. But to the extent possible, the legislation tries to ensure that the benefits of that electric production go to accrue to those people who helped pay for it.
Along those lines, that leads to another question. Where would the offshore transmission backbone come on shore? Would it be in New Jersey?
Well, it definitely would be in New Jersey, and our plans are that it would be in New Jersey at least at 2 points. PJM, the grid system operator, will have a good deal of say as exactly where they want that power to come ashore. The advantage of the backbone is that instead of having a number of individual lines from the wind developers that are only usable when that particular wind farm is producing electricity, and if it's 40% or 44% or whatever percent is the capacity factor, the line is setting idle for the rest of that time, unlike the backbone that will enable a higher utilization of the transmission.
Well, your project seems to be generating a lot of interest, Bob. Here's another question. How will Atlantic Wind Connection prevent coal power from Virginia being wheeled up here to New Jersey?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, let me say that the amount of coal power that could be transferred from Virginia to New Jersey is very slight. And I will explain that more in a second. But I want to say that, you know, the backbone proposal has generated a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of support, and there are those who take shots at it or have reasons to think that it's not such a great idea. We fully expected that when you do something brand new, when you do something bold, when you do something beyond what is the norm, you know, a 10-year plan, a massive development of 6,000 megawatts, we fully would expect that there are parties that would not necessarily find that a desirable idea. So we're not upset by any of the observations that others have made. And this idea of coal coming from Virginia, I think Rich, you mentioned about the zero cost of wind. There's a rather complicated process that PJM uses to determine what power is put onto the transmission system. And as simply as I can state it, it is determined by price. So generators, be they coal, nuke, gas, whatever, place bids for the next day as to what they will charge for their power. And it's based on the fuel cost, not the capital cost, but the fuel cost. So wind has a zero fuel cost. So wind is going to be bid at zero and will be the first power that is selected by PJM. Now, the study that I mentioned earlier, Brattle, said that out of 6,000 megawatts potential of this line, it would only take 200 megawatts of wind bid in at zero to limit coal moving from Virginia to New Jersey, 33 megawatts. And I compare that to the ability of 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind to replace any 12, well, it wouldn't be 12 because of the capacity factor, but probably 5.5 coal plants could be replaced with the amount of wind that could be generated offshore. So 33 megawatts is not an issue to really be concerned about.
Here's another question, and maybe Dan Cohen could address it. With all the discussion on the benefits of scale, can the panel address the benefit of the Fisherman's Energy Atlantic City project? Dan, you want to address that?
Okay, thank you. Well, there's a number of benefits to our project. Number one has to do with the progression of environmental planning that the Blue Ribbon Panel called for. The Blue Ribbon Panel said, we do want to develop renewable energy, but we need to do it in a responsible manner. We're trying to develop renewable energy, one, because of issues of global warming, but we're also trying to do it so that we understand how to measure and mitigate the impacts on other natural environments, birds, whales, dolphins, etc. So one of the benefits of a small-scale project, such as our demonstration project, is the ability to do that environmental monitoring in a responsible manner to create a blueprint for the larger projects. The second part of this is that all the projects we're talking about offshore, and including, as Rob mentioned, the three proposals currently in terms of Blue Water, Deep Water, and ourselves in terms of interim projects, are all tied up in the in the leasing process of Bummer. That process still is potentially 4 to 5 years away or longer. In terms of this project will be able to be built next year. It will be able to create the first pathway to development of New Jersey taking a leadership role. Without taking that, we don't have the ability to be the first in the country. So that the second aspect. Next part is people talk about the size and scale and financing. You know, a 350 megawatt wind farm is about $1.3, $1.4 billion. No one has built any offshore wind farms in America yet today. We have to build confidence in the finance community, in the insuring community, and in the public in their ability to, on a number of these levels. So one is environmentally, we build confidence. We have to build it in terms of reliability that we were talking about in terms of feeding the grid on a manner that the grid will take it at zero. We also have to have the confidence within the finance community. So this project, we believe, will be able to build those levels of confidence on all levels and put New Jersey in a place where it could be first or will be first in the country, and also be able to give in terms of the local community, because we see, as opposed to some people's discussions, significant local support within the Atlantic City community, because the Atlantic City community itself is trying to rebrand itself. So we think there's many benefits that will accrue from this project, many societal and economic benefits.
Thank you. We have several questions dealing with the workforce, and they all revolve around essentially what types of job types and time frames will offshore wind provide for people in New Jersey, and where are the technical schools where they can get training for those type of jobs?
Well, let me start on that because another member of my team who's here today, Jamie Ewald's doing a lot of work on this in partnership with DOL. The state does have a focus on the green and clean energy sector in terms of building workforce development. So it's really incumbent upon us to start building those partnerships now with our community colleges, our other institutions of higher learning, our trade associations, our laborers, and really get ahead of this, and that's what we're doing. So there are plans that are being discussed, a lot of brainstorming going on, and a lot of activity around this area.
Thank you. Somebody else asked about workforce development. No, okay, that's all right. There was a question here about what, I'm sorry, we're being a little technical. What does 1,100 megawatts mean? 1 megawatt in traditional fuel, 800.
800 homes.
But I don't believe that's the same in wind, right, Rob?
A megawatt's a megawatt.
Oh, yeah, I guess you're right.
So what 1 megawatt would generally power enough for about 800 homes.
Okay. This is a long question, but it's from a soldier. And he's helping veterans with employment. And with these considerable job opportunities you speak of, will you have any set aside for a veteran's preference, especially that these involve contracts with government? Anybody want to field that? I don't believe the legislation does.
There's nothing specifically in the legislation that is correct.
I guess that could be part of the rules later on.
Or part of an application as part of the benefit analysis involving set-asides for something like that might be something that a developer may use as a creative aspect of satisfying the beneficial standards included in the requirements.
I'd suggest that the person who's interested in that become involved in the stakeholder process and make their views known during that process. Who are the legislators supporting this the way the solar is supported by Shiver Cooler and Smith? I guess I'll take a stab at that. The bill was sponsored by Senate President Sweeney and and Tom Kane, so it had bipartisan support, and I don't remember the votes, but it was pretty overwhelming in both houses, I believe. Thanks, Peter. That is Peter Mandelston, who everybody's mentioned several times today. Peter, do you want to say anything about your project?
No, in the project, the legislation in New Jersey received, as you said, wide bipartisan support. The final vote was 98 to 16.
I guess that's a combination of both houses.
Correct.
Yeah. Aside from the permitting siting issues offshore, what is the thinking on what will happen with the generation electric onshore? In other words, does its voltage need to be stepped up or stepped down? And if so, do you envision coastal substations or will be transmitted to existing distribution infrastructure?
I guess I'll take a shot, and then Bob, maybe if you want to add. All of the existing projects already have interconnection queues with PJM for existing sites onshore. All of us are kind of designing transmission solutions for our own project. Obviously, if Bob's project can demonstrate a benefit to the projects in terms of timing and cost, then it would certainly be considered by the projects. But we're all, I think, contemplating, at least initially, to go in radially into substations or switch yards that are already existing. And depending on the technology that you use, if you use an AC line, it doesn't have to be stepped up or down. If you use the DC line, you would have to have inverters to step it up and down at the point where the substation, and then when you come on shore, it would have to be stepped down or up, depending on what the voltage was. So it just depends on the technology that you're using and where you're going into.
Along those lines, do you expect any problems with reliability as experienced in Texas, where which has a lot of onshore wind and the most in the nation, but one day the wind stopped blowing and they had some real problems with reliability?
Well, I know only a little bit, so this is a dangerous one for me to respond to. But yes, there was an issue with wind, but it was also accompanied by very cold weather, which had an impact on the flow of natural gas in the pipelines. So you had kind of a mini perfect storm that resulted in that issue of a drop in generation. I think that one of the benefits we talk about the backbone is that one, we will run the backbone into shore, not along shore, but into the interior where the grid is stronger, and we can do that because we're not putting several different lines into shore. And that the grid or the backbone will enable power to be moved to where the power is most needed. So that's a real benefit. An additional benefit is that if during the blackout in 2003 in the Northeast, if this line had been in place, there's a term called black start. By using DC technology, you're able to go from zero to full capacity on a line instantly, and the power would have been able to have been restored in the Northeast. Almost, well, it would have been immediate, not all the way through because it's not enough megawatts, but it would have restored power to New York, especially almost immediately.
Hey, just a comment for me on that. One, it'd be a good problem to have, because if we were worried about the offshore wind in New Jersey tripping offline, it'd mean we achieved tremendous success in installation, right? Number two, because Texas is well more than a gigawatt installed, being the largest state, as you mentioned. Number two, I think wind and gas work very well together. I think New Jersey has significant gas generation, and I think the two would help alleviate any concerns.
Thank you. Rich, I guess here's a question for you. They're talking about the United Kingdom and its 50% of the world's offshore wind energy. Sorry. What were the industrial policy decisions that facilitated that development, and when were those decisions made?
That facilitated the UK getting the installed base asset. I think one was they put in place the incentive scheme called the Renewable Obligation Certificate, and it was originally at a certain level, and they stepped it up to 2 rocks. So they doubled the, for offshore wind, you could get 2 of the renewable obligation certificates. So that drove a lot of return in the projects, and hence a lot of excitement from the developers to go forward. The conditions in the UK are pretty favorable with shallow water conditions and good wind. So good conditions, I think, drove the success they've seen today from the developer standpoint.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. What you see in Europe really is driven by what I think is a widely accepted view on climate change. They are light years ahead of the discussion on their belief on where climate change is, whereas this country is still debating climate change and whether it's real or not. And so when the European Parliament came out with very aggressive mandates for every country to have a specific percentage of renewable energy, of their energy from renewable resources, that was from a consensus that climate change was happening and that they had to act now, and many countries have been acting for many years, Denmark and others, to solve the problem. We're still having that debate. And so, the policies in Europe and the activity that you're seeing in Europe are really the result of the acceptance of climate change and maybe some others. But that sophistication has not reached the U.S., and I suspect that when it does, the scale that Rich and Bob and I have been talking about up and down the East Coast will materialize, because people realize that you're never going to get rid of fossil fuel generation, nuclear generation, but you should diversify your fuel mix a little further with renewable resources, and so I think that's a big driver there.
Yeah. Tom, if I can chime in here and just recall for people why Germany, of all places, which is about on the same latitude as New Jersey, has so much solar generation, and why they've got a commitment to offshore wind. And you will recall, and I don't recall the exact year, that Russia cut off the supply of gas. Does anybody remember what? It was like a year or two ago. Yeah, it's a couple years ago. And that sent the fear of of energy security reverberating throughout Europe. And when I talk about us not having a national policy, for me, offshore wind is not an issue of climate change. I happen to be an environmentalist. I happen to be concerned about carbon, et cetera, et cetera. But really, that doesn't make any difference. It's energy security, national security, and if we had a national policy, we would realize that what we ought to be doing now is preparing for the future. If you'll recall, not too many years ago, oil reached $142 a barrel. Everybody remember that? Now it's inching up pretty high right now. And at the same time, you had gas prices, natural gas prices going up. Natural gas is pretty low right now. But what would happen? What would happen in this country, and what would happen to energy prices if in fact there were another incident? Probably doesn't have to be as major as 9/11. What would happen? The fear factor would come in, prices would shoot up. What's going on in the Middle East right now may in fact be enough, and is already causing prices to go up. So this nation, independent of whether you think there's climate change issues or not, this nation ought to be making a commitment to, as Rob says, fuel diversity, energy supply diversity. Get us all that we can into the electric car business so that we get off of the oil dependency that we have and do the right thing. That's what's really needed.
Yeah, but the interesting, just a comment, the interesting was what scared Europe was, of course, Russia's action on cutting off gas and other resources. We had that happen twice in the 1970s, and yet we're where we are today, where we were then. So,
just a quick aside. I was chief of staff for a United States senator in the mid-'70s during those crises. And I can recall standing in the Russell building where the Watergate hearings were held, and 4 senators and a couple of staff people were talking, and there were these long lines. And one of the senators said, you know, now that we've got the American public all concerned about this, we're going to be able to get energy policy passed in this country. That was in 1973.
Talking about national energy policy and the discussions we've had earlier today about scale and nurturing this industry, are we ever going to reach the scale that is hoped for without a national renewable portfolio standard where everywhere has to generate a certain percentage of their electricity from renewables, not just individual states like New Jersey and California?
But you add up all of the individual states, and we are now at 27 to 30 states that have either RPS standards or, in the case of Virginia, like a goal.
Is it enough to achieve the scale?
It's a huge help.
Yeah, but even before we get to an RES or other things, the federal government, the best things that they can do right now to incentivize this industry is to the PTC and ITC extensions for offshore wind and get those extended through reasonable dates, investment tax credit, production tax credits. I mean, if those expire, they've been extended, I think, for a year. And Peter, maybe you can, if I'm wrong, I think the PTC, ITC was extended for a year. Yeah, so I mean, other than the permitting timeline, the next best thing that the federal government can do is to make sure that those tax incentives are available for offshore wind.
Would you just explain for the audience what the investment tax?
I'm not an accountant, but it essentially you get to amortize up to 30% of your capital costs in the first year as opposed to multiple years ahead. Again, I'm not an accountant, but that is a tremendous benefit to the projects. So,
if they disappear, those projects
if they disappear, the cost of electricity to the ratepayers is just going to be higher.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Anybody want to ask a question? Matt Elliott from Environment, New Jersey.
Hi, thank you. Just a quick question. I'm wondering, to what extent do we have to continue to talk about storage in terms of long-term reliability of wind energy, or does the backbone help solve some of that problem?
Well, the backbone would help a great deal, and what's really great about offshore wind is that it blows during the day and when the load is the greatest. And so that's a big advantage over terrestrial wind generation or solar. And obviously the sun is shining during the day, so solar is during the day. I don't mean to cite that, but I mean in this area I think solar opportunities are limited. So the real opportunity is with offshore wind, and it really is not the big issue that renewable energy faces and wind faces elsewhere in the country.
I understand that ORECs are limited to offshore development. However, what's the logic behind limiting offshore when there perhaps are some additional viable onshore installations? And I'm from Atlantic City, where we do have onshore installations that are successful.
If I understand the question, it was why are ORECs limited to offshore wind? At the risk of passing the buck, because that's what the legislator said so, there is some sense that onshore wind is supported by standard RECs as a Class 1 or as a Class 2, which I understand are not nearly in the same financial category as the offshore wind at this point. Currently, the only thing the board is authorized to do under this act is for offshore wind, qualified offshore wind, which does need to be in either territorial or federal waters.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that, the Board of Public Utilities did a study back when they did the initial offshore wind solicitation back in 2007, and the consultant for the board essentially did not an exact, but an estimate of what the renewable resource was for the state. And onshore wind was pegged at a very small number, and where the resource was, it's basically up in the northwest part of the state where you won't be able to build anyway because of the Highlands Act and other things. Onshore wind was pegged at about 80% of the in-state potential for renewable energy. And so, the policy that the state has, kind of gone to recognizes that in order to get to the goals that they're trying to establish for renewable energy, it's really offshore wind that's going to drive it. That, again, that's not to forget about the other technologies, biomass, thermal, the other things, but in terms of what the potential is, offshore wind is the largest source.
What stage is the backbone in right now, and what concretely has to happen for it to be put in place?
Well, as Tom mentioned, we're before the FERC right now, and we anticipate clearing that hurdle within a couple of months. We are initiating the process with the Department of Interior and Bomber within a few weeks. We have to get a right-of-way grant for the backbone, and then next year, PJM, who I mentioned earlier, is the independent system operator. This is the entity that operates the grid for this state and 13 others, or a total of 13. All of the states we're dealing with are within PJM, and PJM has to make a determination as to whether or not they will admit the transmission project into what's called the Regional Transmission Expansion Plan. And that's a little known activity, of course, but it's a major one for us and for anyone else wanting to build transmission that is connected to the grid or as a network service for the grid. And this means connected in more than one place. And so I think next year we anticipate that the PJM will take this under advisement. The PJM is made up of 500 and some stakeholders. All the utilities are members of the PJM, and because they have considerable staffing resources, play a major role at PJM. I'm not so sure that all the utilities are going to be enthusiastic about the backbone for whatever reasons, but fortunately there's an independent board that will ultimately make that decision, and I'm optimistic that they will see the wisdom and the benefits, and that they'll finalize that next year. And so we think by 2013, the individual wind farm developers will be able to see in a very transparent way the status of the backbone, whether or not it's a product that meets their needs, and if it does, then they will have to make a decision at that point whether or not they want to be a part of it or do their own individual lines, and that'll boil down to an economic decision and a construction risk factor. In the meantime, every wind farm developer until that point is going to have to, as Rob said, have their own transmission plan. They can't rely on some third party. Their financing parties will not allow that. We understand that. We just anticipate that we'll have a good relationship with all the wind developers and work collaboratively and cooperatively and try to come up with the best solution possible.
If wind developers decide to have their own line to shore and go into the PJM network, would they have to go through the exact same process that you're going through right now and that you predict you'll have to go through with PJM and their approval?
No, they only have to get the interconnection request through PJM, and they've all taken steps to address that issue already.
Okay, and then just another follow-up with that. If
they do have to get a permit from the Department of Interior, the agency bomber.
Okay, so there wouldn't be an advantage to them per se in terms of the permitting process for them to just connect to the backbone, because that would save them some time.
Well, there is an advantage because that saves them the need to go through that process. They have to get a permit for the wind farm. They also have to get a permit for the line. The process for transmission with Bomber right now is a shorter process than what the individual wind farm developers have to face. And that's why, even though we got started later, we think that we'll actually catch up and be able to put the backbone in place in time to service these wind farm developers. If we don't, they have a plan, they'll put it in place.
Let me just follow up your question. When we apply for a commercial lease with the federal government, for commercial leases, not for limited leases or right-of-ways, for commercial leases, it automatically, under the regulations, the federal regulations, it already includes a right-of-way for your transmission line. So when we apply for a commercial lease, we have to identify in our application the route that our export cable is going to go, and then when we get the commercial lease, it implies a right-of-way for that line. Assuming, if Bob's line is out to the east of us when we apply for a commercial lease, if his was an economic and timing benefit to us, then we would include a route out to his line, and it would be included in our commercial lease. So.
And Bob, what other options would you have if PJM determined not to admit you into their transmission plan?
Shoot myself.
Well, I guess my question is that it seems backwards to go through the permitting process, which is arduous and costly, and then have to then follow up to see if you're going to actually be allowed into the transmission system.
I don't know.
Well,
I don't think in the early stages the cost for the individual wind farm developers is going to be that significant. And again, as Danny mentioned, we're talking about a wind farm that are in the billion-dollar figures, and so some engineering and some scoping of transmission is a relatively small expense. And if we are successful, the cost of transmission will not be absorbed by the individual wind farm developers, but will be spread across the ratepayers that benefit from the transmission project. And our studies show that that benefit will go beyond just the areas along the shore in these 3-4 states. It'll go into Pennsylvania. There'll be benefits. There'll be locational marginal pricing benefits that'll going to lower the utility bills for at least the eastern half of Pennsylvania. PJM has a process to allocate the benefits. So in fact, what we hope is that not only are the wind farm developers spared the cost of their transmission, but that the ratepayers in New Jersey and Maryland and Delaware are not covering the full brunt of the transmission bill.
Bob, I'd like to jump in there. Your filing, I don't believe, mentioned any numbers on ratepayer impact. I mean, and it's a $6 billion project. Can you explain to me how you're going to spend $6 billion and ratepayers' bills are going to go down?
Well, in this regard, the corridor, the transmission corridor between Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and this area in New York has been determined by the Department of Energy in a study about 3 years ago under George Bush that it's the most congested transmission corridor in the United States, along with one other in California. And because of that, there's what's called congestion. And congestion leads to higher prices because energy can't be moved around as easily, and the most efficient energy might be in one part of PJM but can't get to another part of PJM. So if you have an alternative route to this congested area, you're going to be able to have a freer flow of energy. And That combined with the wind being bid in at zero is going to result, as I said, in $17 billion net present value reduction in ratepayers' cost over 20 years. For New Jersey, that is going to be a higher figure of some dollars a month. I don't know if it's 4, if it's 5, if it's 6. We're in the process of studying that right now, where their bill will be lowered because of that. And because the wind is coming in at zero, that brings the overall market down. So that's how you get the benefit.
Okay.
That's offset, by the way, with the PPAs that are signed and have to cover the capital costs of the wind. So I'm not saying it's a net reduction, but it's a reduction that's significant.
Yes, thank you. My name is Captain Bill Broadley. I'm a pilot in the New York Harbor and the Delaware River. I represent the American Waterways Operators and a Mariners Advisory Committee for the Bay and River Delaware, and I'm the guy that's involved with offshore routes to make sure that we have clear way for ships and tug barges going along in the New Jersey coast. And I just wanted to make, I guess you are aware of the BOEMRE thing that has the offshore routes indicated, and we'd like to make sure that you don't want to put any wind turbines in our way. It's kind of important to us, and we'd like to make sure that you understand that we're willing to work with you in any way that we possibly can, but we ultimately want to have our freeways, our fairways in the works, if you might say. Thank you.
If I can comment to that, during the process that leads up to this call for nominations, we've had numerous task force meetings, and a task force is orchestrated by the federal government and includes all affected agencies. So we have had the Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, DOD, we've had folks from your industry. That has helped to inform that map all along. Also, the baseline study we did over the course of 2 years that was referenced earlier took into consideration where all the pathways in and out of the port, both north and south, were. So we hear you loud and clear on that. The ports are extremely important to us in terms of how that is an economic driver for the state, and we certainly wouldn't want to do something that would have a negative impact.
I'm wondering, in light of some of the problems off of Cape Cod, how much of a constraint do you think individual siting is going to be where you have people who say, not off my shoreline, build it somewhere else?
I think the benefit, at least with respect to our project, we're looking at deep water technology, which allows us to install anywhere between 60 and 150 feet of water. And you don't reach those depths until you're 13, 14 miles or more. The horizon is 14 miles. So, you know, even on the clearest day, these things are going to look, you know, pretty tiny. And if we've all been to the Jersey Shore, which I think we've all been, it's not always clear that far out. So the benefit, again, of the deep water like jackets, some of these floating foundation technologies that are being researched now, is that you will continue to kind of move these out further so that you won't I mean, other than Danny's project, which is 2.8 nautical miles out from the shore, none of these projects will be closer than 13 miles. So I don't think you're going to have the type of concern. You may have some homeowners or some groups objecting for whatever reason, but from an aesthetic perspective, I don't see the type of reaction that you saw up in Cape Wind.
And you want to keep in mind that Cape Wind, the opposition, was financed by the Koch brothers, who own extensive coal resources, and they spent tons of money whipping up the public. But during that time, even despite that, 80-some% of the people, even on Cape Cod, were supportive of the wind farms being developed.
Yeah, and I just want to add on the nearshore project that Fisherman's Energy is doing. They did extensive surveying, and there was not a negative impact that was found.
Okay, we'll take our final question from you, Elliot.
Hi, Elliot Ruga, New Jersey Highlands Coalition, and I have a question for Ken and Michelle. draft Energy Master Plan is a couple weeks away from being released. And from what we're hearing is that there'll be a certain amount of pushback on incentivizing, the continuation of incentivizing solar. But seeing BPU and DEP here today promoting offshore, I'm wondering if there's some inconsistency that I'm not, maybe I should be seeing some consistency.
I'll just say relative to the Energy Master Plan, it is a BPU product, so I'll defer to Ken on the specifics of the plan. And DEP did attend all the stakeholder meetings over the past year. I would just have to say, you know, watch our actions as a state and what we've done over the last few years to move this industry forward. And also, we have appreciated some significant increase in economic opportunity from solar in the state. The opening of our solar manufacturer that was referenced earlier, that's because we built an industry here. And I think the creation of an OREC, which follows similar how we built the SREC, is an indication that we're learning from a best practice. So, and again, on the EMP specifically,
Yeah, I'm certainly, the release of that report should be relatively soon. There's been an indication that there will be public hearings starting in late March, and expectation that certainly the report will be out before that time. Don't know that there's necessarily any consistency in that the offshore wind is designed to prove net benefits. And so long as we can show that net benefit process, I think that the state is comfortable using a mix of methodologies and a mix of fuel sources in a situation like this. So I'm not so sure that it's a one versus another, and at the risk of getting myself in trouble with the moderator, just because it was in the paper as what might be in the EMP doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be in the EMP.
Well, I'd just like to say we're not the paper, we're an online
report is correct. I apologize.
I want to thank our panelists. They were terrific. They did a great job. I learned a lot today.
Also, I want to extend my thanks and give a round for Tom Johnson for running this for us and making it. A couple final points. As you can tell by the cameras and the mics, we are recording this, and we'll be making a videotape of it in easy-to-watch form on our site. Give us a couple weeks. Keep coming back often to check to see if it's up yet. We did this with the solar panel, which is up there now if you're interested, and it, I think, worked out very well. And we have a few minutes for you folks to hang around and talk. We'd also ask you to complete the surveys for us. We hope to do many more of these, and the feedback's a huge help. But thank you all for coming.
We hope you enjoyed this program from NJ Spotlight. If you have comments or suggestions, please email them to info@njspotlight.com. NJ Spotlight, where issues matter, on the web at njspotlight.com. For everyone at NJ Spotlight, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you out there on the net. Take good care.